I've took the vehicle and raised it off the ground. The side rails of the frame are 19 inches from the concrete. And I've set it on two big steel jack stands. Always use steel to support the vehicle. I've got them setting just past the subframe mounting on the frame rails. That's probably, front wheels are probably about 7 inches off the ground, I guess. And we'll go ahead, drain the transmission fluid, and set a pan under the transmission cooler lines, and break the clamps and get the hoses off the transmission lines and let it drain. Take these two clamps off of it. Take these front wheels off. They look like 19 millimeters. Yep. And I'll let that sit and drain a while and take a little break. Went ahead and capped off the transmission cooler lines and then propped the rubber hoses up to the battery support. Kind of made a little bit of a mess running down the transmission. I'm working on the manifold bolts. They're ranging from 14 millimeter to 12 to 13 because they're rusted and ground down. If you get a 13 to fit on it, just barely beat it on there. You may need some heat to get them loose. You don't really want to break a stud off. There's 3 in each downpipe. And I'm going to take this stiffening brace loose. There's 4 14 millimeter bolts in it. And I'm probably just going to let the exhaust down from the hangers because the cat bolts look pretty bad. And I'll just take the hangers loose and let the exhaust hang down far enough to get the frame over it. But I'm hand braking these loose so I don't shear them off. May need some heat. And I'll probably go ahead and take these 2 lower transmission bolts out and the inspection cover off for the torque converter. The exhaust is down. I just took the hangers loose from the muffler and the tailpipe and let it down. I'm going to need new donut gaskets. I went ahead and took a few more bolts out of the bell housing. I'm going to leave that one in there. And I'm going to go ahead and take this transfer unit off. It's just got 14 millimeter bolts in a circle. Be sure to keep a hold of it and set a drain pan underneath of it. And while I was taking the dry shaft flange loose from this transfer unit, I went ahead and loosened the stiffening brackets up on the corner of the frame in the back. They were 14 millimeters. Offhand, the top of this thing has a vent tube. It needs pulled off, and then there's a 10 millimeter bolt holding the bracket. That'll be taken off. So it'll jerk off and sensor wire off. It's a little sticky. I left one bolt in. I don't want it dropping off and causing a catastrophe. Let's take a hammer and get on the back side of this flange and that gets the gap opened up in it. You want to watch hitting the flange if you're going to reuse this unit because you'll damage the bearing in there. Just tap on the housing some, get a little bit of transmission fluid come out of it, not much. I'm on the passenger side. I might unstake this axle nut, stick a punch in the caliper through the rotor, and take this nut loose and pick the axle back just a little bit. Take the 12 millimeters out of the calipers and the rubber brake hose and wire the caliper up to the strut. And then work on taking this stabilizer link loose and the tie rod end and the lower ball joint. Nut. A 36 millimeter fitted good. Do not impact at all. Risk damaging the wheel bearing from the percussion off an impact. I ground this punch down to unstake those nuts, the axle nuts. It's kind of a wedge, goes right in there and opens them right up. That looks good. Now get the tie rod in, the stabilizer link, the lower ball joint loose. It's a good place for a cutting torch. The axle's dislodged pretty easy, so it's not going to be too big a pain. Keep in mind the steering wheel should always be pointed straight ahead after any disconnections, which should be done while the wheels are still pointed forward without turning it, at least turn it back before disconnecting any of the vital parts for the steering column alignment. This lower ball joint didn't seem to be too bad. Some of the weight off the vehicle with the floor jack. And just kind of peck the side of it. Lift it up a little bit on this split here, but it wasn't. You don't want to load that down too much and ruin the ball joint. It wasn't too bad. Once you get done with this side, do the other side the same way. After the stabilizer rod's unhooked, take the 6 millimeter Allen head and wire brush the threads off on it, and take a 18 millimeter, 17 millimeter, and rinse the nut off. I'm doing it at the top. It'll be easier to do up here than down there. I'm going to leave that link hooked up till I pop the other side ball joint loose, and then I'll take them both links loose. Before disconnecting the lower control arm, make sure the wheels are straight ahead and that the steering wheel is straight ahead. And I'm going to stick a bar in that hole in the control arm. Pry this arm down, get this ball off out of the hole. Like that. The jack handle. And the key to getting these links apart without destroying them is to wire brush the threads off. I put a 17 millimeter on it, box end. With a ratchet in the center of the box end, and just hold on the nut and let it ratchet to as it backed off. But it wouldn't have come if I hadn't got the rust off the threads and then put a little penetrating oil on it. Anyway, just take the load off of the drive shaft against the inner joint boot, but not enough to pull it apart. taking a hammer and tapping the axle back a little bit, get it dislodged. And don't hit this so hard it mushrooms the end of it up. Get in behind there, pry it forward a little bit, get it out of the spindle and the wheel bearing, and voila. Be sure not to damage these teeth on the ABS sensor ring. You'll have a bad day if the ABS is working and not malfunctioning. Kind of looks like inside CVC joint boots starting to leak grease. That's typically an indication of it starting to go bad. It'll be vibrating around, causing the grease to leak out. Check the ball joints while you're in here for slop. Replace as needed. And tie rod in ball joints and inner ones. And one thing I want to get at is that heat shield around this axle. Get that top bolt broke loose. 12mm. And go on the inside and hit the inside of the CVC joint outwards with a hammer and a punch or crow's foot, whatever, and dislodge this axle and remove it. Do the same for the other side and get it out of the spindle. And there's two more bolts holding the heat shield in place around the passenger drive axle. Take those out. I just stuck a punch back in there and dislodged the axle. And it'll be fine. Just be sure not to stretch the axle out of whack and separate it inside of these housings, or you'll ruin the axle pretty much. I'm going ahead and removing this exhaust support bracket. I had to beat 11mm onto the back one. The oil pan one's 12mm. Well, the heat shielding is going to stick around. I'm going to go ahead and take the 14mm bolts out of the intermediate shaft support bearing. And that heat shield will come out with it. That is one giant cluster right there. Be sure not to damage your dust shields on all this stuff. The bolts holding that intermediate shaft bearing up to the block 3 of them. Two of the raised up round ones that moves the inner one on the top. A little bit of a hole opening up now. It's an outfit. And I'll just pull the strut back and get the driver's side axle out. Kind of keep it suspended so it's not pulling on that inner joint. Now I'll go underneath there and get between the frame and that axle and pop it out of the transmission with a pickle fork. And this is the target here, is this open slot in the back. And I'll just take a hammer and hit that, and it'll pop it right out of there. It's any look. Just like that. I suspended the axle with a bungee cord so I don't risk tearing the CVC joint up by separating it. And while I'm under here, go ahead and take these engine mount bolts out. They're 14 millimeters, and I thought there was just one, but there might be two back there. I think it's just one of them, this one here. That'll probably come out anyway, but these three. And anytime you feel like it, rotate the motor over and take all 8 of the torque converter bolts out. They're 10 millimeters. And this power steering line on the front passenger side of the frame will have to be separated and relieved out of its hold down clamp up there under the air conditioner pump. And a drain pan put under it to catch the goo that's going to leak out of it. I'm over on the passenger side. I've sprayed some penetrating oil on the return line on the power steering. Take that clamp loose and this 10 millimeter band clamp off the frame so I can bring the lines over to the side and let the fluid drain out instead of running all over the frame. And I'm going to unplug the power steering pressure sensor. It's right behind all that. Smelly stuff. And while I'm over here, I'm measuring with the tie rod end level with the rack the distance it is away from the body. The tie rod end's level. So it's about 10 1/4, 10 5/16. And it's just for a record. I'm going to put the frame back up. I finished taking the 8 torque converter bolts out to the access hole on the bottom of the transmission. Those are special bolts for the torque converter and not to be mixed up with other 10 millimeter headed bolts. They're hard. And I took the rest of the bolts out of the bell housing except for one on the bottom and this one up here behind the front mount. I'm going to start to hang the motor, take that front mount off and get at that bolt on the side of the bell housing. It's looking pretty good. Now if the power steering fluid's drained out the return line, I'm going to take these 10 millimeter bolts out of the high pressure line on top of the power steering pump, and hopefully it won't make a mess. Underneath on these front corner frame stiffeners, I wrote an R on the passenger side, and I took 17 millimeter bolts out of them. I sprayed some penetrating oil up on top of them before I took them out, so hopefully they wouldn't break off like they did this time. I wrote an L on the driver's side. And then I'm going to go back to the back of the frame and take those stiffening brackets off the back. One end goes over top of the frame, one goes in behind it. Then I need to put marks on the frame to where it's setting out against the body on all 4 corners. So it will be put back in where it belongs. At least real close. And finally, the 2 little transmission mounts underneath the driver's side. They've got 4 nuts holding them down to this frame side rail on the driver's side. Either take those out, mouse over the video, and hit the circle I to continue to part 2 of the video.